In any piece of interactive media, there arrives a potential for skill. As a player plays through the game and gains experience, their skill at the game increases, creating a sense of achievement, having learned something. This experience is known as the learning curve. And while it works very well for single-player games, however, in multiplayer games, there comes the issue of two players at different ends of the learning curve inhabiting the same server. In PvP games, this is particularly problematic because an experienced player can be difficult for new players to compete against. In a game with a sufficiently high kill ceiling, then a new player might spend more time waiting to respawn than familiarizing themselves with the game mechanics. This is called the skill gap, and it's something that every game developer making a multiplayer game needs to address at some point during development. So the question is, how can we solve this problem? Some games attempt to solve the skill gap by creating a ranking system. They give the player a medal and as they can play the game and gain arbitrary experience points, that rank will increase, and then that ranking is used to match them with players of similar skill levels. This works really well at higher levels of play. However, once you get to lower ends of the skill tier, you see things start to fall apart because players are bringing in their experiences from other games. You have players who've never played a first-person shooter before, but have played PvP. Players who've played first-person shooters, but haven't played PvP. This is particularly only an issue in free-to-play games, but there are also experienced players posing as new players to bully new players. Players who are familiar with both first-person shooters and PvP, and even players who have played other champion-based shooters or something, which people keep comparing to TF2, even though they really don't play that similarly. Anyway, furthermore, by making it so that newer players are not playing alongside more experienced players, then the mechanics that experienced players have mastered, there will be no incentive for newer players to learn them. In Team Fortress 2, for instance, a soldier wouldn't need to know how to rocket jump if there aren't people who are very skilled at rocket jumping for him to compete against, because he's not at a competitive disadvantage without it. We see that. So a better solution to the skill gap, in my opinion, is to add a mechanic that makes certain aspects of the game outside of the player's control, or at least partially outside of the player's control. This is usually accomplished through the use of an RNG mechanic. Now, RNG mechanics will usually affect players at different skill levels equally. However, the impact of those effects is felt more heavily by experienced players who, for example, if there was a mechanic that randomly influenced how much damage your weapon dealt then experienced players who would have otherwise memorized the damage numbers and HP of every class would know exactly how many shots it will take to kill any given class at any given range. which which would have given them a strategic advantage, but they cannot do this with a random damage modifier. While a new player who isn't familiar with doesn't know how much damage their weapon deals, just or have a general sense of it, wouldn't even notice the effects of RNG influencing their damage output. Now, unfortunately, many hardcore gamers will vocally despise random RNG mechanics in PvP games, especially. Now, this is usually because things like random chance RNG mechanics don't reward their high mechanical skill, even though that's literally the entire purpose behind an RNG mechanic. And digress. Anyways, the way to avoid this backlash is to implement the mechanic in a way that is invisible to the majority of the player base. For instance, if you have something that randomly modifies how much damage your weapons deal, don't make it possible for players to get an overlay showing how much damage they just dealt. Or you could also even make it so that their hit points aren't visible, but instead visually communicated by the width of their health bar. Something they're just implemented in a way that players are less likely to spot. Remember, hopefully the skill gap issue won't hurt the new players' enjoyment of the game or the experienced players.